Hey guys, Joe Bonamassa here. Sit back and enjoy Joanna on this exciting episode of KTBA's Artist Spotlight.
It's funny, I always said music chose me. I kind of feel that way. I feel like I used to sing when I was a little girl, and I always imagined singing in front of people. I just felt like it chose me, and the guitar ended up in my life in a crazy way. When I was a little girl, all my friends were taking ballet, and I was really tall. I was already 5'2" at 7. So I was this long, tall girl, and my mom looks at me, she says, "I've got another plan for you." And I woke up one morning, there was a Sears classical guitar in the living room, and she's like, "You're gonna take guitar lessons." And I was like, guitar lessons? I remember thinking I don't want to take guitar lessons, so I did. And I liked it. I took it for a couple of years, and then I quit because I was like, I don't want to be bothered practicing. But I did go to the saxophone a few years later and picked up the guitar again in high school. And I never put it down. So I did fall in love with it, for sure. I loved music. I loved music my whole life. And I spent most of my free time listening to music, going to concerts, just looking at vinyl all day, all my life, all kinds of music. My mom loved blues and jazz and took me to Newport Jazz Festivals every year because I grew up out east. Eventually with the guitar, I did play the horn, and people were like, "Oh, you should go to Berkeley and play the saxophone." And I went pretty far with it, but I was like, I wanted to sing, and the guitar was more natural for the singing. And but then the older I got, the more I loved the guitar more than anything else. My mom worked at a college, and one of her coworkers, her husband, taught guitar, and I was totally into blues rock. This was trying to put what year this would be, about 1976, and but I was really super heavy into Led Zeppelin and the Stones, and super heavy, and I'd research them. And I had heard blues anyway. I saw Buddy Guy when I was 10 years old, Brownie McGee, Sonny Terry by the time I was 13, Sun Seals, Junior Wells, all as a teenager. But I loved the British rock and I knew it had blues in it. So I was like, yeah, and it turned out the guy I took lessons from was a specialist in early ragtime Delta stuff and slide guitar, which I didn't know anything about. And he's like, yeah, so he thought I was a very talented guitar player. And it's all fingerstyle acoustic. And he's like, "I'm going to teach you how to play the slide." And I was like, "What is a slide?" And then he played me Robert Johnson. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's the slide." So he was really fanatical about technique. And his name was Ron Johnson. He's no longer with us. But he turned me on to a lot of Rycooter, which I wasn't familiar with. But he's the one who really started me on the journey for slide. I wouldn't be able to be who I am today without his influence. It was all kind of by accident, a happy accident. Not a lot of young guitarists played slide back then, and even still to this day, I'd say seeing slide guitar is a little bit of a novelty. And there's some great players out there, Sonny Landreth, Derek Trucks, but it's still not something you see a lot. Well, when I was in high school, playing in the jazz band, and my girlfriend was a drummer in the band, and I was like, you know what, she was in a band young, she was a drummer, she was already in a band at 16 playing gigs, and I'd go with her, I'm like, I want to do this, and I was really into singing, and she's like, oh, I have a friend who knows a band that needs a vocalist, and you play guitar too, so that's good. And so I auditioned for them, and it was kind of a mashup of Neil Young, The Grateful Dead, bluegrass stuff. It was just but it was an acoustic band, and I was a singer, and we actually got our first gigs at the Sons of Italy Lodge in Worcester, Massachusetts, every Friday. And I was 17, so that was my first paid gig. Well, our bass player's uncle was the president, so we had a connection, and it was a really fun gig. We played in the room, the hall, and in the front, all the guys in the suits were there, and the bocce court. So I had my, it was a fun Italian experience. I loved it, yeah. When I look back, musically, I've always been all over the map. what I loved. And a lot of it was my mom. She was super hip, and she would go to like New York. She had friends and bring back like Jimmy Cliff albums before he hit it big. I was like 10 years old. Heavy like Miles Davis, and so I just listened to everything. But then I got into like I said, Ry Cooder and Zeppelin and Little Feat and Delta Blues. But I would say Buddy Guy at the time, because I loved his frantic energy and his chest stuff. And Jimmy Page. I'd say Jimmy Page because I still fanatically love Led Zeppelin. I think he's probably the biggest influence on my playing. One of the issues I did have was because I was kind of all over the map, even in the blues world. And people later, like Mike Zito and Albert Castiglia, will come up to me and say, like, you put out some albums that were really big influences on us because you really blended rock and funk with blues. And a lot of people were doing that back then. I was like, but I got criticized for that. But I kind of, when I went to Chicago, my mission was I wanted to learn the blues, like really learn the blues. And I played with like legendary people, like straight ahead blues, like people like, my first gig was Johnny Littlejohn, who's gone. And I was in the house band at Buddy Guy's Club, the Checkerboard Lounge with the 43rd Street Blues Band. So we played behind Buddy, we played behind Junior, we played behind James Cotton, the Myers Brothers, I mean, heavy blues people, and then some unknown people too. My goal was I wanted to take the blues and learn it and then kind of maybe go to LA and become a rock and roller. But I got pregnant and had a son and stayed in Chicago, stayed in the blues world, and but still added my own flavor. Yeah, I try to be true to me, you know, and there were people that criticized it wasn't this enough, wasn't that enough, and some people loved it, but I felt like I had to be true to myself. I mean, I could play traditional blues all night, and I love it, but I also knew that in what I grew up listening to, if I just did that, say one thing, I would be, you know, denying myself. Plus, in Chicago, you do very long gigs, and the crowd might change 3 times. So, like, they might want to dance, they might want to hear blues. So, that's also served me well now, being a live musician, that I can kind of go in and out and bring people to the dance floor, make people happy. If it's a bunch of men in the club, I know they're going to want to hear hard blues or rock. If it's more of a mixed crowd, I can play more R&B. So it's kind of been good for me to be versatile as a live musician. To be the nice young girl from Massachusetts making my way to the Windy City, whoo, boy, I have stories to tell. I mean, some of them were wonderful, some of them were rough, you know. I was in a knife attack from a blues person who I won't name because she was pissed at me, and I mean some heavy stuff. I used to carry my Fender Twin on the bus to gigs, you know, just like hardcore, crazy stuff. But that was me, I was driven. Other people were wonderful and mentored me and, you know, taught me how to drink whiskey on the South Side. And, you know, it was some great stories, but I mean, it was thrilling because a lot of blues heroes, I got to play with them. So I would be calling people home, guess what? I just jammed with so-and-so, or I just did a gig with so-and-so. But then there was, you know, there was rough times too. And I think being a female, I always tell other women, I'm like, listen, I came up in Chicago, people would yell at you on stage, embarrassed. It's hardcore. I mean, they'll do it to other men. But to be a woman, like, you better play. So it was like combat training. So I'm like, you gotta have a thick skin. Because first of all, it's a music business and it's rough. And if you want to make a living at it, like, you've got to have that Teflon, you know, especially as a female, if you want to be taken seriously. So, yeah. You know what? By the time I was in high school, when in my first band, I quit high school. I said, I'm done. I'm going to be a rock star. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I was like that. And it was very... I didn't become a rock star, but I haven't had a job a real job since like 1983. So I never thought I could not do what I did. When I was younger, I was really felt like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, and who's going to stop me? But I also knew I think I also brought musically something to the table because I played rhythm guitar for a really long time before I could solo. And I know I'm a really good rhythm player, and I'm used to backing people up, so I know I could do that. Then I could solo. I got pretty good at it. I played slide. I sang. I could play acoustic and electric, but I really listened to people because I backed up a lot of singers and harmonica players and people in Chicago, and they liked it because I was respectful of what they were doing. So I could work as a side person, and then eventually I had my own band. And being a female guitarist, especially back in like the late 80s, it was me, Bonnie Raitt, and like Debbie Davies, and a couple other women in the rock world, but there was no one, so it gave us kind of an edge, and Sue Foley came along. But when I started, I didn't even know about Debbie Davies. I was like, felt alone, and in some ways it was weird, but in some ways it served me because it's like, oh, there's this woman playing. So it was, you know, and it still helps because it's interesting to people. Like I had people stop me here, oh my gosh, you were shredding and you're a woman, and they're like, women feel empowered and men are impressed. So it's, you know, it's kind of nice. Probably one of the funniest stories was I was in France, and we were actually staying in Luther Allison's apartment, the whole band, while he was in Memphis making his first record for Alligator. And we locked ourselves out of the apartment. And we had a road manager. We was the third floor, and he climbed up the side of the building over the balcony and opened the balcony door to let us in. But I'll never forget, I was like, wow. I mean, there's just one that popped in my head, but there was always crazy stuff because you're on the road, so you have to amuse yourself. When you're in front of an audience and you feel the energy, that's what I feed off, and we all do. And that was the thing that first hooked me about being a musician. Besides making music with other musicians, I'm basically a live musician. The studio is a place that feels awkward to me a lot of times because I don't do it that often, and it's kind of a weird environment, especially if you have different producers and whatever. And I worked with some decent ones, did a lot of records in Europe. I just did a record with Joe Bonamassa in Nashville, and I was super nervous because I'm like, oh my God, it's Joe Bonamassa, one of the greatest guitar players ever. And he made it so enjoyable and easy. He would take a song and he would arrange it, and he goes, now I want you to envision that you're in this club and there's this guy there, and he like even tells me, he's like, do this, and then when you play your guitar, I want you to feel like you're just gonna burn the whole place down and your guitar's on. I mean, he would just describe like this scene like a movie. So I was like, yeah, and I got it. And we would talk about how to approach the lyrics and what it's saying, and I feel like we got really good results from it. Kind of go in your own head and imagine things, pull up that emotion. So I think the older I'm getting, the more I'm not, I think you also have to be not afraid to tap into emotion. And I realized for a lot of my life, I was afraid of that. And I think the older I get, the more I'm like, I'm not afraid anymore. You know, I think that's one of the gifts of being older, is that you know yourself more, and you're sort of like, you know what, who cares? I'm just gonna do what I do. I find getting older liberating because you don't have to give a beep about things anymore, you know, and more comfortable in your own skin, and kind of like, well, you know what, I mean, not to be morbid, but it's like, okay, this is really like the big last chapter, and I've had a great life, but now it's like, I'm gonna do what I do. No apologies, and my kids are grown, so I don't have to, you know, I put a lot of energy into them. And I mean, I love them, but I don't have to do that. So I can devote more of my energy to my music and myself. You know, raising children, I had 2 athletes for children, so I did a lot of mom stuff. And I always hid it kind of because I wanted them to shine. So nobody really knew. But, you know, the guitar player, I was in different things. I was touring. I had some nice things going on, but I didn't really there's no pictures of me in my house. You'd never know. So my mom identity was number 1 for a long time, and guitar was kind of second, even though that was my life. But I feel that being a professional guitar player, it's so, I can't imagine who I would be without it. It's like so intrinsic, and it's so, I mean, my whole life's wrapped around it. I mean, I realize now, since I was 17, I've been in bars. I'm 57. That's 40 years of playing music professionally. I mean, there were times I wanted to stop because it's rough. I was like, I can't take it anymore, you know? And especially if you're focused on success in the industry, and I was like, I wasn't getting it. So I got really frustrated for a while, and I was like, I'm quitting. And then when I hit my 40s, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this because I love what I do. And wherever it takes me, it takes me. If not, it takes me nowhere, it takes me nowhere. But I'm just going to keep going. And look what happens, you know. So you never know. If I was going to give advice to a younger person wanting to do what I do, following in my footsteps, I would say, for one thing, be honest and true to yourself. Because, you know, we have to find our way. Sometimes we emulate people or whatever, but people can tell if you're up there posing or posturing or playing for your ego. Don't play for that. I mean, we all have to have a little bit of ego to get up on stage. We like the adulation. I'm not saying that, you know, I don't, but I play for the music, for the vibe, for the feel, and for the people to feel it with us. So I feel like if you are legitimately honest with your intentions, people will feel that genuineness in you. I mean, I'm not a pop star, so I mean, they have their own thing. They're successful, they're billionaires, some of them, so I don't know if I'm giving the best advice, but I would say whatever your path is, I mean, whoever you are, you're here as you, so let you shine. And be prepared to know that there's going to be a lot of ups and downs. It's going to be an artist in America, to make a living at it, you have to sacrifice many things. I haven't had a vacation in 27 years, you know. I have to work. But, I mean, part of me, I wouldn't change a thing. All I know is to be an artist is to be who you are.